If you've ever watched Band of Brothers when Easy Company's in the forest outside Foy and they're getting shellacked by German 88s, well, that actually happened, so it's a good deal more terrifying than anything in Warhammer Fantasy. But if dwarfs and Germans ever did happen to get into a real-world conflict with ridiculous amounts of artillery, and the carnage was as severe as what you're about to experience here, then it'd be safe to say that what follows made the Battle of the Bulge look like a spring vacation in Disney World. It's about to get real freaking ugly, and unlike Verdun or Passchendaele or any other battle of that scale with millions of shells pounding the dirt for months on end, everybody's gonna die in about 5 minutes flat, which is perhaps a small mercy, saves them the post-traumatic stress. Now you might be thinking to yourself, wow, that's a dumbass army, and you'd be right, but there's a reason why something this stupid actually has a chance of working. I mean, build roulette is a thing, that's always a part of it, but Dwarfs vs. Empire is traditionally the very worst matchup for the Empire in Warhammer 2. And not only is it the worst matchup for the Empire, it's one of the more lopsided head-to-head scenarios in all of Mortal Empires. The Empire is a very solid faction, with a lot of even and advantageous matchups, but they do not deal well with Dwarfs, which means Dawi control a bit sometimes. So why is an organ gun and flame cannon army kind of a threat? Well, Imperial Cav's bad versus Dwarfs and tends to be easily dealt with, so a lot of players just forgo it. A Great Sword Rush can be okay, but tends to be the first thing that Dwarf players game plan for, and organ guns will eviscerate them in seconds, and their lower tier infantry simply doesn't do anything against 90 armor. So you can go really wide and spam handgunners, but Thunders and Quarrelers and these organ guns will outtrade you and explode you, and the artillery fight is usually just a wash at best. Two players being equal skill, Dwarfs just tend to have a big advantage. Simple as that. It's not that it's impossible or unwinnable, it can just be really hard if they know what they're doing. Now, I don't hate the Empire formation or army comp here really, but let's just say they're woefully unprepared for the storm coming their way. And just believe me when I say the opening salvos are barely a taste of the wholesale slaughter about to be unleashed in a few minutes. Couple housekeeping issues if you ever find yourself in this scenario. If your opponent has this much firepower and very little to defend it, you must rush them with all your red arrows. It doesn't matter what you brought, you could have spammed 19 archers, they all need to close the gap, and some of them are probably going to want to run into melee. There is no reason to sit back and lollygag and get cute and try and trade, because you simply don't have enough DACA. Your opponent will have more if they bring 9 artillery pieces, because 2 Hellblaster volley guns, the Hammer of the Witches, and Marcus Wolfhart ain't enough to deal with 9 artillery units. The other element I will note here is that putting your units into square formation can actually be a great idea in many scenarios, particularly for units like Trollhammers or handguns, because it lets you orient them faster and have greater, snappier control over their fire arc. But you absolutely cannot keep them in square if your opponent has an overwhelming artillery advantage like the one seen here. If your units are being shot by cannons, immediately drag them into spaghetti line as wide as possible to minimize that incoming damage. We've seen that to an extent here, but some of his units stayed in formation a little bit too long, and we've already seen a few of his infantry get utterly devastated by a single organ gun volley because they were in square. And I think right now the Empire player is quite literally shell-shocked. I think he didn't have any idea that this kind of build would be coming his way, and why would he? This is not a normal Dwarfs build. It's actually quite disgusting, and that's kind of what Slade is known for. He likes to troll. He likes to bring 1 or 2 units and just spam them and see what kind of ridiculous outcomes he can acquire. He's like Benicio del Toro in the MCU. He's a collector of rare, shiny artifacts, in this case, collecting the defeated, disembodied souls of players who lost to his illogical and offensive meme builds. And they are quite illogical. They are quite offensive. The artillery's already dead. Many of the handguns are now in the fire arc of the flame cannons, and that's when things get even nastier for the Empire rush here. Not to belabor the point, but this is everything you should not be doing if you get caught with your pants down against a build like this. The only way you can possibly get into range and start killing off the gun crews is by sending everything everywhere all at once. All those units in reserve waiting to get sent in the next wave. I thought we learned that human wave tactics are usually pretty bad if you're trying to avoid loss of life. So either pull everything back and try to bait them in, then rush with everything, or just go as soon as you see their army. And probably you should just go, because that'll be the closest you get to their army. If you retreat and then run forward, well, then you're still going to be at their max range. They can stop and start shooting you again. None of this half-measure lollygagging, waiting to take your turn to go over the top of the trench and take a howitzer volley to the face. The only saving grace for the Imperials so far is Wolfheart himself, who's gotten some nice snipes in on the organ gun crews and looks to be taking at least one unit out of the fight. But yeah, the Empire is just running right now. They're moving towards the edge of the map, and on a map with more terrain features, more woods, that might be an okay strategy, but we're on Summersong in the Isles of Ulthuan, and it's real open. Artillery has real nice line of sight to explode them on the way in. So Empire took too long to make that decision. The retreat maybe would have been okay if it happened immediately. Instead, he's lost about half his forces already, and we're only a couple minutes into the game. But hey, you've got Wolfheart Legolasing the shit out of a bunch of Dawi. They got the eyes of a hawk and the ears of a fox, and they just lost their arm. Cannons are moving up, and it's only going to get worse for the Empire from here, but that means that the entertainment value from their final suicidal charge will be quite the spectacle indeed. The Empire realizes they have to go. I think he just clicked in his brain, oh shit, I can run to the edge of the map, but then it's gonna give them even more time to fire at me, so we might as well just run in and get this over with. But once you get in range of the flame cannons, that's when the firepower and the spectacle gets just out of this world insane. Because organ guns are devastating versus infantry, but flame cannons are another level entirely, especially against low armor, tightly packed formations. Their reloads are unrelenting, and their wave clear is downright brutal. Their major downsides, of course, are low range and keeping them protected and online, which can often be difficult, but there's nothing to threaten them here. And in a situation where one would probably be enough to seal the deal, Slade's got 3 to go with the Goblobber and Organ Concerto. It's been spreading their symphony in the form of giblets and body parts all across the beaten zone. And my god, I mean, this kind of carnage is just insane. Like, even for a campaign when you're up against like 3,000 or 4,000 screaming gobos, like, it's very rare to see this much firepower brought to bear and this much death on the way in. The Empire have done nothing here but explode. It's amazing. It really is what Verdun would have looked like if no one bothered with trenches. They just said, hey, like, what is that, dude? It's like a 500-man collateral. It's literally like if everyone just said, you know what, we're just going to stand out in the open when the artillery shells start raining down. Now, Wolfheart has dropped his net to shut down the Dragonback Slayers momentarily and give his Imperials a little bit more time to charge into melee, but this will probably be a mass rout before they even make it into melee combat with the artillery. I don't think anything's going to make it there except maybe Sigmar's sons with their Unbreakable. Collateral! Collateral! Oh yeah! Mom! Get the camera! Like, this, it's just disgusting. I mean, we can just let it play out at this point, right? Like, y'all see what's happening. So, if you're the Empire, what do you do in this scenario to prevent such nightmares from occurring in the future? Like I said, avoid square formation, which they're still kind of in right now, but he's pretty much given up at this point. I mean, god, that's like two flame cannon shots is enough to just finish off the units at this point. This build is an abomination. Slade, you should feel very disappointed in yourself. I'm very disappointed in you that you would do something like that to some poor, unassuming individual. So yeah, avoid square formation, don't lollygag, immediately run into melee with whatever you have. There's no point staying in the beaten zone in the fire arc to trade and get all fancy-pantsy. Like, it's not going to benefit you, right? Like, you have less firepower. If they have more arty than you, you are the one who has to advance. So don't wait. Just go. I still don't think it would have been enough here. I think the organ guns and the flame cannons would have just completely devastated this kind of build. If you're the Empire, yes, having 1 or 2 cav units can be useful, but it's always dangerous because they're not good here, right? Like, you kind of have to have something that potentially puts pressure on an opponent's back line, and you could do that with Huntsman in a Vanguard position. You could do that with a number of things, but maybe just have 2 Empire Knights. Again, the issue is that a Rune Lord with a slow and 1 Thunderer or 1 cannon gets rid of that completely, and Empire Knights just don't do a lot of damage here, so it's a lot of money to spend in a matchup where you really don't want to bring them at all, but you kind of have to anyway. And obviously, if you did have them here, well, then a lot of those cannons would have died. The Dragonback Slayers by themselves would have... Well, I don't know. I don't know, man. Maybe not. Like, even having 2 Empire Knights here probably had enough artillery to deal with the cav real quick. You just gotta time it with the rest of the infantry charge and hope that it works. So, crazy, hilarious, dumbass build from Slade. Hope you guys enjoyed it.